I would talk about it in terms of each of the components of the mission variables, because it may not be critically important depending on what echelon you're talking about in every single context. And when you think about the 3 dimensions of the OE, right, that kind of takes care of itself. When I'm doing mission analysis and I'm thinking about, all right, I've got information considerations, I got physical considerations, I got human considerations, both friendly and threat. Particularly when you don't have a staff, right? You're at the company level. You're doing that yourself, maybe with the help of the first sergeant and the XO. With staffs, you have the ability to do that as well. But we think over time, it becomes second nature in many ways. And when you look at yourself through that framework of the 5 dimensions, or the 5 domains and the 3 dimensions, you think about terms in threats, and then our friendly capabilities, right? In terms of physical, human, and informational. When you say recent conflicts, you're talking about the conflicts in Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh, and so forth. I would tell you that as we were writing this, we were thinking not just of the conflicts that are in the news right now while we were writing it. And both of those conflicts, Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh, happened while we were writing this, right? But we were also informed heavily by our experiences over the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of the influences of it is how we talk about the operational environment, right? Because at one point we were thinking, well, maybe we should just talk about physical and cognitive sides of things, right? And in conversations with Army senior leaders, we said, well, if we do that, we might run a risk of forgetting the importance of the human dimension of warfare and conflict. So it was that experience, that our Army earned the hard way over 20 years that kept the human in there, and it wasn't just about information and physical, it's human, information, and physical, because there's that human dimension to everything we do. In terms of the recent conflicts, we think that what we've observed up to now, and it's too early to say, everyone's got all the lessons yet, right? Because we don't have all the information. But we think that the events that have unfolded over the last several years have confirmed our vision of warfare and what needs to be done to succeed, starting with ideas like combined arms, right? So when you had the opening battles in this current war in February, there were people talking about, the initial cyber attacks. They were very disruptive. Then the counterattacks against the Russians in cyberspace were very disruptive. You had people talking about UASs and their ubiquitousness. I would tell you the first thing that popped into my head was, where are all the Russian infantry, right? Why are they not dismounting and just doing simple turning movements on roadblocks on the road? And I mean, I went right to the combined arms piece right off the bat. And then why were these battalions conducting attacks unsynchronized with battalions on their left and right? Where was the depth in terms of thinking about their assigned areas in terms of deep, close, and rear? And where was that joint integration with Russian capabilities in terms of enabling the operations they wanted to conduct? They all seemed to be absent, or they were happened in fits and starts, and it didn't seem to be about right. And so things like that resonated with us and told us that we think we've got this about right. There were other aspects that, as we observed, we wanted to reinforce in FM30. So we spent a little bit of time re-examining how much we address close combat, close operations in there. We took a look at the idea of convergence a little bit and did some refinement in that regard. We emphasized, I think, a little bit more that human dimension in terms of the importance of training, right, competence. And then in the leadership during operations piece, we emphasized that this isn't all about commanders, right? That mission command approach requires a professional non-commissioned officer corps and very proficient staffs to be able to do these things. You can't operate on a mission command approach without good staffs, without a professional non-commissioned officer corps. And then, again, back to the leadership piece, one of the reasons why there were so many Russian field-grade officers and general officers killed was they were forced to go and lead from the front because they didn't have subordinates who understood the big picture, who understood the intent, and they could operate with mission-type orders. So all of those things came together in our collective heads in one way, shape, or form, and allowed us, I think, to refine this a little bit more. Yeah, so we acknowledge the role of the technology and not just technology in and of itself, but on the capabilities that might be available. But we didn't want to constrain ourselves to things that may or may not be fielded, for example. So we wanted to keep it back to the big ideas on what is available, both Army and Joint. And we wanted to address also expectations in terms of scarcity, right? So one of the reasons why we talk about the main effort is because certain capabilities, whether they're Joint or Army, are going to be inherently scarce. Everyone is not going to get their fair share. So we didn't want to set expectations that there will be some technological solution that will enable you to execute the tasks that you were assigned. You needed to think about in terms of what might be available, but not base your entire planning process on the assumption that those things would be available. The other thing, there's a lot of the technological sides of things that are very dynamic, and you could actually make the doctrine fall out of date if you talk to specific systems too much. So it was very common for us to get phone calls about, when are we going to put robotics and AI in the doctrine? Well, we didn't put robotics and AI into this doctrine because until someone shows us that robotics and AI will allow us to fight differently instead of better, then we don't really need to change. It would be like, do I need to change this doctrine because our artillery can shoot 20 kilometers further? No, right? Because we can fight better, right? More effectively, but we're not really fundamentally changing how we fight. And the other, I think, useful metaphor or simile might be, you know, in 1982, when we had the first air-land battle, 100-5, we described a world in which the Army had to do certain things if it wanted to win. But that Army was not equipped with the things that were envisioned for it to have at the time, right? We didn't stop fielding the things for air-land battle till the late 1990s across the entire Army. Well, the same is true now. So this book talks about the things that we need to be able to do if we want to win, but all of those tools aren't necessarily available yet. But if we were to fight tomorrow, we need to fight this way. And it won't be as great as it will be in 2030 or 2035 when we have all of these capabilities that we're fielding, but we'll be close. That's a great question. In fact, General Rainey asked us that question when he was the CADD commander. He says, do we want to do that? And we said, well, we don't think so, sir, because we've got pretty mature doctrine and doctrinal publications that go into some depth in terms of the employment of those types of capabilities, right? What's different on the maritime side of it is it's part of the surface of the earth, right? And so there's only a limited amount of people that are ever going to be up in space. There's certainly no people in cyberspace, not real people, right? It's virtual. And the air piece, again, is relatively transitory. But the two places on the earth where you are actually physically moving the bulk of your forces are going to be air and sea, or air and maritime, I mean land and sea, or land and maritime. And so the other thing I think that we were thinking about is, again, people conceptually understood that, but the one thing we hadn't addressed, even though the Pacific pivot, right, was 10 years ago, was what do we expect of Army forces in a place like that, surface of the earth, Indo-PACOM or the Baltic or Arctic or any of those other environments. So that was the reason why. Yes, so we're going to do a top-down, bottom-up approach. The top-down is what we're starting with. So the ADPs will be updated over the next 18 months to 2 years. We're hoping for 18 months because a lot of the multi-domain operations concept ideas are already out there in one way, shape, or form, but there will be refinement necessary in those ADPs. Some of the ADPs and FMs will be done in tandem, just like we did FM 3.0 and we were working on ADP 3.0 at the same time. So FM 2.0, ADP 2.0, FM 4.0, ADP 4.0, they'll be worked in tandem. The others will be worked individually. You know, we've got 3 or 4 that the Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate is responsible for that we will get to as well. And then the branches, across the branches and warfighting functions, they'll start working the field manuals as quickly as they can. But quality is job one, right, not speed. And so it's going to take 2 or 3 years before we get the bulk of the hierarchy of doctrinal publications revised to be completely aligned with FM 3.0. Yeah, I could talk about it a little bit, and I kind of gave a hint there, but I think it's the imperatives that really will have the most impact on training, with the tenets right behind in terms of the development of staff officers and officers in professional military education, NCOs as well. But those imperatives, in many ways, shapes, or forms, are already part of the operational environment we provide brigade combat teams and their division staffs at the combat training centers and in the MCTP warfighter scenarios. So that has already begun. Right? We've had a LISCO focus at the training centers and in MCTP warfighters going back to at least 2016. I think the CTCs might have been even 2014, right? So that has already begun, and one of the things that have to be affected most of all are going to be in the details, right? Now we have the exact tenets. Now we have what the imperatives are. Now we have an operational environment model that can be applied and then driven into the programs of instruction across the different schoolhouses, the combat training centers, and then used at home station as well. Yeah, so we've said, going back to 2017 edition here, we've talked about this. We always say that Army forces are going to be part of an overall joint force, and in most cases will be part of a multinational coalition with allies and partners in one way, shape, or form. We continue that in this book as well. Our multinational allies and partners can bring capabilities to bear that we necessarily can't, right? So the U.S. Army has a Big Tent approach. We want to be able to fight with anybody who fights with us. So we've got a lot of imperatives going on within the Army right now, Project Convergence and so forth, that are all about Army, joint, and multinational interoperability with our command and control systems, how we employ fires, how we maintain a common operational picture, and so forth. And so 3.0 touches on those ideas in a broad sense, but we've got other publications that get into it in a little bit more detail. But that's an ongoing process across the .mil PFP. And the doctrine piece simply sets the stage for saying, hey, we've got to be able to operate with our allies and partners because they bring capabilities to bear that we need as part of an overall multinational team to achieve our objectives. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks a lot. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. I would ask those of you that haven't read this yet to read it, and tell your friends and neighbors to read it as well, because we need cards and letters from the force to help us make this thing better and start that professional dialogue across our Army to argue about multi-domain operations in the same way that we argued over air-land battle for 15 years, right? So let's get out there and start that. Thanks.